Welcome to Hacking Hypermobility Podcast.
I'm Luna.
And I'm Shelly.
And we're two Bendy Mommas.
Hacking Hypermobility.
Now we're going to continue our conversation by asking Luna the same questions that she asked me in our last episode. So, enjoy.
Yes. So, how are you neurodivergent, Luna?
I have to be honest, I scripted this a lot bit. So I'm going to have to go off script a little bit. So it's going to be okay.
Okay. Are you telling me or are you telling yourself?
I'm telling me.
Okay.
So I am, my primary neurodivergencies are ADHD and autism. But based on that list, I guess I ordered a combo meal because mine came with a side of anxiety and trauma, complex PTSD. And I've also dealt with some learning disabilities, including when I was a kid. They evaluated me and they thought I had dyslexia, but they said it wasn't severe, that I kind of grew out of it. And I always kind of had a hard time understanding what that meant.
I always wondered, grow out of what?
I think now I know someone who's dyspraxic, and I think really that's what I deal with. And like many other zebras, my sexuality isn't strictly heterosexual. And a dominant part of my daily experience is difficulty with sensory processing. My emotional and auditory processing delays affect every aspect of my daily life. So those are my...
I love that your answer is basically my answer, but like science-y.
That's basically us in a nutshell.
I love it. Because you took the time and formulated a good answer, and I was like, I'm gonna wing it.
I didn't. Okay, let's be honest.
But that is a good answer.
Formulate a good answer. I scripted the answer so that I would feel prepared and calm enough to be able to record a podcast with you. Okay. That was me accommodating my neurodivergent.
But see, I never, and so there you go. So that's something, that's how it's hidden, right? You did that.
Yeah. That's me masking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was me, when I would finally get started on a project, I would read that draft 50 times before anybody looked at it.
Oh, and I also
so it wasn't a draft though, it was done.
So I grew up acting and performing and stuff. And people would ask me in school, why are you not scared to do like public speaking things or whatever? I'm like, because I do this every day. I practice this all the time.
See, I don't think anything of this recording right now because it's not live.
No, there's no audience except you, and you're safe. Yeah.
Yeah. But if this were live, I would be a mess. Okay. So those are your neurodivergencies. How were you super, super late finding out like me, or what's your deal with finding out?
So here's one place where you and I do diverge.
Okay.
So I am a little bit younger than Shelly, though. So that may be part of why I was diagnosed with some of this earlier, but also it was very disruptive to my life. So, my parents were seeking help and stuff. But so I was diagnosed with ADHD in middle school, I think about the age of 12 or 13. So by the time I went into high school, I knew that's what I was dealing with and had accommodations that were a struggle with education. By the time I was 14, I was medicated, which is very rare for a girl in the 90s. But my autism diagnosis was missed. I was not diagnosed with autism until I was much older. I was actually 39. So same as you, kind of pandemic burnout and other things, just kind of brought everything to a head. Now, the sensory issues were identified when I was a younger adult. I don't quite remember the exact age, but maybe 25 to 27, actually before I had my baby. But I don't think it was ever a formal diagnosis. I think it was just a way of them dismissing my anxiety, or what they labeled as anxiety.
Okay, so you would be having a sensory issue, and they would say, oh, you're just anxious because of X.
Yeah. And I was well, what's wrong with me? I can't, tolerate wearing certain things, or, just very severe sensory breakdowns over, for me, it was light, sound, and texture clothing.
Okay.
Particularly, it was in loud social environments. Like I couldn't, like I was having like meltdowns from the overstimulation, and like would
Uh,
have like what I felt was like a mental break where I just couldn't
so
be around
they
people.
they wrote that off as social anxiety when you were really
Right,
having like a
right.
sensory response. That sucks. So you got diagnosed the ADHD in middle school. So your parents were aware and did they take you to like the family doctor, or did they take you to like a
So,
neuropsych? Like I'm trying
so
to
no,
remember what
I
it was
think,
like back then.
so I had already kind of internalized my symptoms,
Okay.
and my schoolwork went, like, it
Oh,
plummeted, and I had turned like very inward and stuff.
that's a big clue, people out there. If your daughter, and actually, that age frame is right around
That's
when my daughter kind of
that's when it
had
becomes very
her.
obvious, in my opinion,
Yeah. Yeah.
that you're different. And I was in, I mean, I was struggling. It was, obvious. My parents did miss a lot of things, but they knew. And so, I want to say they took me probably to my family doctor first. I
Right.
don't quite remember exactly, but I did end up seeing like a counselor and a psychologist team. And so
Okay.
I did like one-on-one talk therapy, and then, the psychologist would like psychiatrist would, manage meds and evaluate and stuff.
Was it just
So
the ADHD, or did they also give you another diagnosis? Like some people get diagnosed with like, I know they don't tend to diagnose teenagers with
no, so it's just
personality
like
disorder.
depression at
Okay.
first. And then so they had my parents consult with like a separate person. He was actually a man. I don't like remember his name to know his
Oh,
exact
well,
like
yeah.
credentials, but I would suspect he was probably like a neuropsychiatrist or something like
Yeah.
that. He did like a formal type of evaluation.
Okay.
One of the like traumatic things of my childhood was actually finding like the explanation and list and diagnosis letter from him, like from the consultation. And it said like basically there's a list of all these things it could be, but I'm going to diagnose her primarily as ADHD and seasonal affective disorder and depression,
Yeah.
um, with aspects of anxiety and OCD, but it just ADHD doesn't really fit. But basically, it's known at this
Right.
time that it presents differently in females. But on that list, at the very top of the list, was autism as a possibility.
Really?
And I remember reading that and being confused because I didn't really understand what it was. And then, of course, being me, I went and I looked it up, and then began the internalized ableism.
Yeah.
So I refused to even acknowledge that at the time.
So
It was years after having been diagnosed
was
and
that's
told by my
early
parents that I was
90s, right?
ADHD. What?
If you were that age, that was early 90s.
I think I was like 12 or 13, but I didn't find this list in like high school. And like I found it because I was snooping, right? It was just also on the list was
Borderline, bipolar, or no? Did it have any of?
he ruled out bipolar because I didn't have any cycles except seasonal.
Okay.
He said I wasn't borderline because I didn't meet the other criteria.
Right.
And he said my body focused repetitive behaviors were not self-harm, which at the time, and I guess is still kind of perceived as self-harm as being borderline behavior.
Okay.
Also on the list was actually some probably accurate things besides the autism to do with the likelihood of abuse.
Oh.
And so I think that's why it was hidden from me. So, so this psychiatrist, who was a man, diagnosed me. I didn't really fully understand that at the time, of course, and then went a few years through high school with medication, and then I continued to seek mental health support throughout my young adulthood. I actually went off medication for ADHD in college because there was this big.
What did they have you on?
I was on
Do you
Ritalin.
remember? Okay.
Yeah. And then I moved to Concerta. But there was this big, like, I don't know if it was just like in college or just I don't know the context, but at the time there were people like taking Ritalin and those sorts of drugs to like
Oh
get a
yeah,
leg up and do their
recreationally.
schoolwork. They would
Oh, yeah.
like they weren't actually. And so I was really
It's
concerned
like
about
when Jesse Spano in Saved by the
yeah,
Bell. I'm so excited. I'm so
yeah, because she's on what uppers, caffeine pills. I
Yeah,
forget what.
she had to study. She had to study. It's like
Right.
Hermione without the
So, but
time
that, but
thingy.
more, there was like this culture of selling the pills and all that. And I was
Right.
really scared that I was going to be perceived as breaking the rules or being a drug addict.
Mhm.
I also come from a family history of addiction. So it's kind of like a trauma response, probably in my part. I really didn't want to be taking a medication that I realized was affecting other things, including my perception
Right.
or other people's perception of me. Um,
Whereas I was like, give me all the drugs.
So I was taking multiple other, I've gone through like every type of drug or combination to try to treat depression and nothing ever really worked. So I had periods of more struggles and then periods of not struggling so much. So that's kind of why I didn't ever get diagnosed as autistic until I was older too. As an adult, I had very severe burnout in the pandemic, just like
Yeah.
Shelley. I actually, that was about the time that everybody got on TikTok, right? Because we were bored at home, bored in the
Yep.
house, bored in the
Yep.
house. Echolalia right there. Still in my head.
I had the
Uh,
Dawn Power Wash commercial in my head for like 3 weeks. New Dawn Power Wash dish spray. Repeat over and over. again.
other rinse repeat. So we were all bored in the house,
Yeah.
and I got on TikTok, and TikTok quickly diagnosed me as traumatized.
Yeah.
Not inaccurate. But then I started seeking, oh, okay, so what does that mean in terms of my approach to help manage these struggles that I'm having, right? And so I
Yeah.
sought out a trauma therapist. I found one. I got lucky, got to see one, even though there was difficulty with mental health access at the time. And so after years of doing just like typical mainstream talk therapy, I went and actually tried trauma therapy. And so the trauma therapist started her, process with me. Unbeknownst to me, she already kind of had an inkling that she would need to involve a neuropsychiatric specialist.
Yeah.
And she told me afterwards that she knew as soon as she met me, but wanted to rule out the trauma issues first. Because apparently, I mean, as you could see in the umbrella term of neurodivergence,
Yeah.
trauma disorders such as PTSD and complex PTSD, developmental trauma, are included in the neurodivergent umbrella because the traits can be very similar. So I am, in fact, a complex trauma and autism patient. And it's not uncommon for autistic humans to be traumatized. Many people are traumatized, unfortunately, but typically trauma therapy in the modalities that are successful do not make symptoms worse. My symptoms got worse. And so it was at that point she realized her suspicions were likely accurate. And then also a lot of the trauma that we started unpacking and pulling out, revealed very neurodivergent life experiences. I went and I was referred to a neuropsychiatric specialist. I think we did like 3 visits, and she was also a woman, and she is also familiar with the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes.
Okay.
So I think I kind of got lucky in meeting someone that is familiar with those things. But it was a little bit of an expense because of the cost, of course. And so I had kind of put it off. And I'd also put it off because of the internalized ableism that I already mentioned. I didn't really believe that I could be autistic
Yeah.
because of certain, I would say, like preconceived notions, but also remember as a child, I had done all that research.
Yeah.
So what I had read as a child was not only read through the lens of being a precocious, child. I was still a child. But
Right.
also it was the information that was available at the 90s does
Yeah.
not align, by the way, with what we know now. And so, I mean, I, like many others, had these preconceived notions of autism based generally on what we see in media,
Right.
which is generally pretty misrepresentative. So, anyhow, things started to make sense once I stopped resisting
Yeah.
the diagnosis. So, I was diagnosed officially with autism at the age of 39.
Okay. So once you got that diagnosis and you accepted it and looked around, did you notice anyone else? Like you were the first one diagnosed, whereas I had my son to kind of, and that's how it was so much easier for me to get there, I think, when I was like, oh yeah,
Well, so
you
you
know,
and I had a similar experience in that when our children were very young, we suspected that.
yeah,
My daughter, as a toddler, had some differences, both physically and neurodevelopmentally, but she was also precocious and social in certain ways and
yeah,
highly communicative. Her and I are both hyperlexic, and hence our perception of being precocious, right? Again, like me, some of the things that were most disruptive were both the emotional and sensory meltdowns. So I consulted with her pediatric primary care doctor, who was a white man, and who immediately dismissed it and said,
yeah,
she can't be autistic. She makes eye contact. She communicates really well. Goes to she was in, like preschool. She goes to preschool and
yeah.
loves it.
Would she
And
have
I like I
would
went
she
in
have
there with
meltdowns
like
at home? Would she be like great at school? Like the pride, like the best,
generally, but not
and then
always.
just have all the meltdowns with you because she was losing her shit because she was holding it together all day? Because
She
that's
would have
how it was
more
at my
she would
house.
have more meltdowns with me, but she really didn't have control over them in any sort of way. Even though she was really keen to follow the rules or be really good at school, she was able to express as a toddler and or not toddler, but preschooler, that she was frustrated with herself for not being able to like do whatever it was that she was supposed to be doing.
Okay, so that's very
Because her
similar to,
sock was making her toes crazy or something.
yeah.
She also so I went in there with this big list of things. So like the fact that she was a really easy, good baby, but she had stopped napping at the age of like a year. The fact that she spoke and communicated early, the fact that she drew representationally very early, but yet couldn't walk and was
Right.
delayed. The fact that when she did walk, she generally walked on her tippy toes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the way she played or interacted, the lining up of things. Like I
Did
had
she
enough knowledge to bring all this to this primary care doctor's attention, and he said there's no need to further evaluate this. She's not autistic.
let me
And my
ask,
own mother said it too. My own mom
yeah.
said, like, it was not just me. Meanwhile, back at the ranch these days, we're all autistic.
So one of the peculiar behaviors that I noticed in my son, and I'm curious if you noticed this in Evie, he wouldn't cross his midline. So like he would be coloring, right? So like if he's coloring, this is his pencil, he's coloring, da 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 da. And if he wanted to color on this side of the paper, he would switch his hands and then color this
Yeah.
way.
And I used to think that I was ambidextrous, which I think I kind of am.
Right. Because he is. He's still
I'm
that's
not as
what actually
skilled with my left hand, but I am more skilled than most people. And
so
my
Rob
grandmother can
does okay.
write backwards in cursive.
Interesting.
So I think there's something there about in the whole dyspraxia thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, I see it. I see what you're saying.
Because that was one of the peculiar things that I had. The OT actually brought that up. Now we had been already referred to OT for other reasons, like that he was working on.
And I probably wouldn't have noticed that.
That was one of the things that I never noticed until she's like, it was a specific thing she did, because I guess crossing the midline is something with motor planning. And I mean,
It's
it makes
difficult.
sense. Yeah. Anyway, so, okay. So you got the diagnosis, the Evie was like clearly
Yeah, so
showing signs,
as
but like
as a young child, I knew my daughter had some sort of neurodevelopmental delay and also
Right.
physical issue, but was gaslit and told, it's fine. She's going to grow out of these things or
Right.
whatever, including writing backwards. Both of us wrote backwards as we were learning to write.
Right.
But there's definitely a pattern of like shared traits in the family that, to my knowledge, no one in any older generation has actually been diagnosed. Several in my generation and the next, like, are diagnosed now. But I'm pretty sure my mother is autistic. One of her brothers most certainly is. He's literally a aerospace engineer, and her father, my maternal grandfather, are all very classic autistic traits.
My papa, 100% autistic.
My dad eulogized my grandfather by saying, in the whole, like, everybody laughed, and now I look back, it was, there was two ways, Andy's way or no way. And there was a lot of friction there between my parents, I think, because of their different neurotypes. But I believe my father is actually like us and is an ADHD combo, like Shelly and I think, or just from observation, I don't know if it's even been studied, but I do think neurodivergent humans tend to partner with each other. Not necessarily the same neurotypes, but different neurodivergencies too. And of course, that compounds the like nature and nurture origins, but leads us to not being formally diagnosed, since and the family just thinks all these things is normal, like what you just said with the crossing the midline thing. I never would have noticed that, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
But also, like, I look as I started to examine like all the other neurodivergent traits in my family, because of course that's what you do once you realize it's genetic. I started to unpack that all that unsupported neurodivergence has not only been the origin of like my own individual issues, but also like generational literal trauma I've identified in like, self-reflections, therapy. And then, we make more neurodivergent humans, right? Like, so my former husband was formally diagnosed also ADHD, and we have a neurodivergent child. My current partner is neurodivergent, also yet to be fully evaluated, but his only identified conditions are ADHD and PTSD, but he has some pretty autistic traits.
Yeah.
But like he's a totally different flavor than me. So it's just interesting, like, I don't know. But the dominant drive, for me to fully identify was definitely my own daughter.
Yeah. So you knew you had ADHD in middle school. Do you remember feeling different or other like before that? Or did you get that diagnosis and immediately otherize yourself?
No, I already felt other. I don't
Okay.
remember not really ever feeling other. In fact,
Okay.
feeling othered has been like the defining struggle and core part of my identity. As soon as I started developing a sense of awareness as a young child, it's always been part of me.
How old were you though when you first realized that you might be different?
4.
4.
I don't think I really felt traumatized by feeling othered or separate though until I was in school a bit longer. But I first remember very vividly an incident that made me realize that I was like an outsider to other kids in preschool. Also, I was like about 4 years old and had a sensory meltdown at Montessori because we were having a Halloween party, and my mom made me wear this really cute Raggedy Ann costume, complete with like a red scratchy yarn wig, greasy face paint. And I just remember being shamed.
Face paint.
Yes. I remember being shamed for like my tantrum.
Yeah.
And it being really long. And then once I calmed down, it's just, I remember being mad at myself and wishing I could just enjoy like the celebration like the other kids were. And like, I think that was the first time like I really was like internalizing that other feeling. But it wasn't until I'd been in school a little bit longer that I really like had more of a concept of it. I think it was like 7 or 8 years old when I really started to like transition from like just an awareness that I was other to like loathing myself because I was other. I started having like bad dreams, and I had this like recurring dream that started when I was like 7 or 8. And then I've had it throughout my entire life, but I didn't really understand it. I couldn't make sense of it until I was diagnosed. And
Oh,
I
wow.
now realize that my haunting recurring dream is like the most autistic metaphor ever. So anyhow, the dream just tells me that internally I was struggling with making sense of feeling those things by that age.
Yeah.
So the dream, I'll try to explain it. I would dream that I was like a tree, but like I was a human trapped in a tree.
Okay.
And so like I was only able to exist as a tree, like watching all the other kids play and go about life around me. And then like we were put on a stage to like put on a play, and I had a hole in the tree trunk. And so like I could participate by acting through the little hole, but I was still so trapped. And so then I like would wake up in a panic whenever I would dream it. And I mean, like I had this recurring dream well into adulthood.
Do you see yourself in the dream? Like, are you like aware of the age of yourself, or is it just, I know, like it's first person?
When the dreams first started, it was first person, like I was that age. As the
Yeah.
dreams, as time went by, like it was always back at that age, like maybe about
Okay.
80. So, but like,
Mm.
it's just funny because already by that time, performing had become a special interest of mine. And so, like,
Right.
acting, pretending, like, lying was how I coped as a child. Like,
Right.
so let's be honest, I still cope by like performing. That's like the mask thing.
Yeah.
In other words, like people pleasing, bad jokes. Like, I've always done that. But that sense of being trapped in your
Mm-hmm.
otherness and pretending through the small little limitation of what
Yeah.
you have, autistic metaphor.
I remember now feeling when you mentioned the costume, that reminded me of in 5th grade when I was dressed as a flapper and I hated it. It was scratchy, but I didn't like the costume. I just didn't know how to describe that it was scratchy to me and that I was uncomfortable. And so like I remember getting in that fight with my mom because of that.
Yeah,
So
recurring fights about clothing in our
yeah.
family have been a thing.
So do you find, does one kind of take more control than the other? Are you more evenly balanced, or is there one that's more dominant? Like,
I think autism dominates my life experience. I'm an autism son, ADHD, and trauma rising.
okay.
So autism is dominant, but like emotionally, I think a lot of times I'm driven by the dopamine issues with
Impulse control.
attention issues and
Mhm.
impulse control and stuff like that.
Yes,
But
that's why I have a master's degree.
yeah, but everything is filtered through the trauma. So it's a
Okay.
complex issue, but I would say autism is the dominant.
The driver.
Ironically, last to be diagnosed.
Yeah. Same for me too. Well, I mean, mine were at the same time.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. So, all of these things. What is the most challenging aspect of these things, like right now?
I'm gonna give you a short answer, then a longer answer. So short answer
Okay.
is coping and being a mom and a partner.
Okay.
Long answer though is finding healthy ways to cope and undoing the trauma of living unsupported through both like my development and adulthood. So
Right.
late diagnosis with a burnout came with an identity crisis for me, and then the cracking of all these illusions, right? So like
Right.
it's the fallout. So family relationships are strained more than ever now.
Same.
As I try to, face trauma and heal the unhealthy behaviors such as like dissociation, people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
It's even more difficult for me than some of the things I have had to face with my disability in terms of my health. Because, one of the ways I had coped emotionally was like exercise and stuff. And so like as your physical disability progresses, for me it's been more difficult to do the things I used to do to cope. And so then I've fallen back on like old coping things.
Yeah.
So it's just the just struggling to explain words.
That's
This is
fine.
the both emotional and auditory processing delays. I have
Yeah.
a feeling, but I can't describe it.
How has that changed? Is the chronic illness, like, well, you kind of just said, so as the chronic illness has gotten harder, does
Yeah.
that make your neurodivergence more challenging or managing your neurodivergence?
I would say the challenges are pretty equal. And while the pain seems like the most overwhelming in my surface level perception of struggles,
Yeah.
if I actually think about it and reflect on it on a deeper level, I realize that I think actually neurodivergence is more of a challenge than my physical difficulties and progression, because being neurodivergent and unsupported is not as discrete in my own personal awareness, and hasn't been because it wasn't identified. And it's colored all of my experiences with my physical disability of having
Right.
inherited connective tissue disorder. So like my neurodivergent traits cause me difficulties, like not only in my own sensory perception of my medical conditions from like the perception of pain, but also to like getting support, getting diagnosed.
Right. That's fair. I
And also managing that for my child.
Yeah, that's been a struggle too. Like I've been trying to get all of my shit together while my daughter is actively falling apart too.
And
It's
that's not easy. It's just
yeah. Well, I wonder, like, I haven't, when I first read that question, it was hard for me to answer at first because like I got all of like I got diagnosed with heads in November of 2021. And then I got my combo meal in February of
it was
2022.
like a rapid fire. For me,
Rapid,
it was not.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, some of it was rapid fire, but I had a little more time. Like,
yeah,
like I had kind of become aware of hypermobility and EDS, and then in the quest with my kiddo, and kind of was aware because of having been diagnosed young with a neurodivergence. It wasn't quite as rapid fire. So yeah, I understand that though, because I think I've experienced that. It does
yeah.
feel that I've experienced like this rapid fire like change
Mhm.
also, but just not as severely as what you did.
You saw on the paper autism when you were younger. Obviously, you have a different viewpoint of that now. Have you have you, as we both struggle to like figure out who we are and like how has your perception of yourself changed over time? Like has the heightened awareness in autism in women and ADHD in women and how it presents differently, has that helped shape a more like, has that helped you like look at yourself in a more positive way? And I'm not saying you don't look at yourself in a positive way now, but do you find that that's all this awareness is
Yeah,
at the end of the
it's a
day
good thing.
helps you? Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of my coping behaviors were dissociative or avoidant in nature. But so that also like affected bodily stuff. So like it caused like pain perception disorders. But my neurodivergence is by both hyposensitive and hypersensitive. So like kind of that yin yang thing we were talking about.
I have that too.
So like you spend so much energy like fighting those things without having a framework of how to describe it or experience it or support it. And then eventually, you grow up a little and you start to try to like come to your own. And so like as I've came into adulthood, like I learned ways to accommodate myself without even having the words to know what I was. Then, you know, eventually I was given the words. But so combine those like perception and sensory differences with like the social and communication differences, it definitely played a role in like having a later diagnosis with like the cluster of medical conditions. So
Yeah.
I think what changed in terms of the progression of unsupported neurodivergence really affected the progression of some of my health conditions. I think my health became a crisis. And so then throw parenting into the mix and then the pandemic. getting diagnosed gave me, you know, like that framework that I said to work through some of those things. So like,
Yeah.
I'm still like you undoing, working through, but it has shifted. And like you said, there was like that rapid fire shift. But if you like reflect over time, I think some of it of my own development and self-awareness as you come into young adulthood, I had started to accommodate, to cope and survive, you know. But I guess now though, what's changed at this stage of midlife is that it's no longer just about survival. Like I want there to be more meaning to my life.
Yeah. I like
Does
that.
that make sense?
It does. So do you have any like helpful resources or any skills you've picked up along the way that you can share with
Yeah.
us?
I'm not an expert on supporting neurodivergence. I am just a human living through it. So there's lots of talk on the different type of therapies, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Before I launch into like what I'm going to say, I would say, you know, like do your resource, try to find professionals that are both trauma informed and neurodivergence aware. But I think the most helpful things that I've done after going through the evaluation process and getting diagnosed was like, well, okay, well, what does that actually mean to me though? So I went through after diagnosis with a therapist and in my own self reflection and journaling, trying to better identify and articulate, define for myself, like how I experience autism, like what is actually happening. So,
Wow. That is, that's amazing to me. I got it and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. That explains everything. Check. I did not.
Initially that was it too, but then you start like, you have these like lightning bolts of recognition and you're like, wait a minute. You mean I'm not just like a bad character person? I'm not just like faulty and defective? Like,
I mean,
I recommend
I guess I did that. I guess I just didn't think about what it was. I do
unpacking.
so many things without thinking about what it actually is that I'm doing.
So that is like, we tend to be emotionally avoidant, right? Like, anyhow, I recommend finding a therapist.
Okay.
Or journaling, something like intentionally unraveling all that to better understand those parts of yourself. Giving the words to not only like explain that, hey, I'm experiencing a processing delay, helped me not only relate better to others and like avoid unnecessary or confusing conflicts and high emotion situations, but also like give the words for ways to like one, set boundaries, or to request accommodations, or just express my needs that I previously didn't even understand well enough to ask for to be met.
That's been the biggest thing for me to realize was, oh my gosh, all of these incidents where I ended up being the quote unquote bad guy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
If now that I'm informed on what was really going on behind the scenes with me, I can look at that and be like, oh, this could have stopped way back here had either of us had the presence of mind to realize what was happening.
Right.
So now that I have that knowledge, the presence of mind is there. So the disagreements over who's right about something I wouldn't say have virtually gone away, but like sometimes we realize now we're speaking the same language, different dialects.
Oh my God. We literally had this conversation last night about like this weird need for like us both to like prove a point and be right, but really it's the same point.
Right.
Like when you want the same things, you're just like, there's that communication.
Yeah.
It's funny, and it would be funnier if it wasn't so distressful.
Yeah.
But one of the things that helps is like having the literal words to explain the phenomena that you don't have the words for.
Yeah.
So
I can't when I found out that there was a word for aphantasia and that like because I really thought I was the only person that was like that. Like I was like, what do you mean picture yourself on a beach? How do you what? Like what? And then it was like, oh, it's a term. Oh, it's a thing. Oh, it actually exists.
So we right. So the first thing is define it, right? Like give it a word. So you may not even know what to define until you like come across it somehow, right? So I mentioned earlier, we used that infographic of like the umbrella term of neurodivergencies. but the lived experience educator has several other infographics that helped me. I'm a
Okay.
visual, I don't hear well in terms of processing and understanding information. That's
But
why
do you
it's
hear all
really
the sounds
ironic
from
that we
like,
have a podcast. Right. So I need like a visual, like classification, diagram, definition. But so those helped me really to like better understand simply and easily, like, oh, this, like
right.
to better identify my experience to communicate and support these things better. So like defining the hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity in terms of each sense. You know, what I wasn't even thinking about like vestibular, proprioception, interoception. Like all I was thinking about was like the most overwhelming ones,
Right.
which for me was, you know, the sound, the light, the texture stuff. But then once I started delving into it, I realized that there were all these other things at play too that I was just completely ignoring because I didn't have the words. So another great resource is to seek out, if available in your area, what we call integrative health clinics and approaches.
Yeah.
So they would have maybe some non-traditional types or complementary medicine. We are lucky to have something like that. And my daughter gets to start in a couple months. They limit it to the age of 12 and up. So another thing that helped me that I found really hokey at first was what you mentioned, mindfulness techniques. So mindfulness techniques seemed too abstract to me, right? But attention and focus issues meant I really had to seek out guided assistance with real concrete structure in order to
Mhm.
practice mindfulness and to do these like self-reflective type things. So I actually found an app. It's evidence-based in terms of, you know, research. It's from medical professionals called the
I'm
Curable
shocked.
app.
I'm shocked that it's evidence-based, science-based app you're recommending.
You're shocked because that came out of my mouth.
I'm trying to be funny.
Oh, okay.
Wait,
I like
I sarcasmed
evidence-based.
wrong. I sarcasmed wrong. Hold on, wait. I'm shocked, Luna.
Okay.
Was that better?
I was so confused. I was like, I think that's like my whole shtick. Anyhow, over
Yeah,
my head.
I actually act like I don't know anything.
Yeah, but she knows stuff.
I'm just tired.
She's just the Ed McMahon. She's just here to laugh at the jokes and
Yeah.
have fun.
Yeah.
But
I'm
anyhow,
tired of jellying. You know what? I have to pee.
you're not allowed to pee.
You know, I have been making a deal with myself. I was like, she's gonna answer 2 more questions, and then I'll tell her I have to pee.
Were you doing the internal negotiations about having to go to pee, but you can really hold on? Go pee. Pause. I'm going to do the same thing. Muting.
Okay.
So I mentioned the Curable app. I do appreciate it. I realize that may not be accessible to everyone. It is a paid app. But,
Oh, okay.
and it is driven towards pain, but it is broken down into like bite-sized pieces. It kind of has like a pathway for you to follow, has bits of information, and has guided mindfulness techniques.
Okay.
The other thing that I found helpful is something called nervous system regulation. There's various techniques. All this is kind of body work based. But there are things you can do on your own. Those are probably the highlights because I'm still working through this, honestly. That's where I'm
Yeah,
at.
same. What does Luna look like when she's masked?
So I think neurotypical and able-bodied people that don't mask these particular things may not understand fully that like a mask to us is inherent and it's like been a part of our development without support, right? Like I think neurotypical people probably do mask certain things, right?
Oh, for sure.
But I think for them it's maybe about playing into the social rules and they do it maybe a little more consciously. For us it was survival, right? So
Yeah.
this is actually like a hard question because it's inherent. It's part of your earliest parts of development, right? So part of the work I've done in therapy is unravel, well, like what is truly the part of my essence as Luna versus the things I unconsciously adapted growing up as a child and really even into adulthood. The mask really is like what allows you to feel safer around people, but in some ways it precludes self-safety. So it's like that catch-22. So like I don't like I struggle to even now identify like was that a mask or is that me? But like I've started to kind
That
of
makes
break
sense.
that
I think that's why had such a hard time, like
down. But I have some
over
ideas.
these last
Like
2.5, 3 years.
yeah,
Like who even am I? Like do
right.
I actually like this, or have I just been pushed into this for so many years. Conditioned. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah. So socially, I mask like to try to fit in, right? Like that whole awkward thing is a stereotype for a reason. I don't fit in. So like I'll make jokes or I'll be really helpful in like work or relationships. As a kid, I learned that being like part of a sports team gave me a group of built-in friends. So I didn't have to like try as hard.
Yeah.
But also there were like the rules around that. So I was like really competitive playing sports until I just couldn't mask my pain any longer. So I think
Right.
like competitiveness and like go team attitude was kind of a mask. As a kid, like I would like hide certain things or like lie a lot because I was socially conditioned just to tell people like what they wanted to hear. Like I didn't want to
Okay.
get in trouble or I wanted people to like me or now growing up, like I think it's pretty normal for humans to try and like different styles or identities as we develop, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I never really felt like I identified with any group or style, truly. And so eventually I just kind of I gave up. Like I remember like consciously being like, okay, whatever, I just don't care anymore. So eventually, instead of like feeling like an outsider all the time, I just retreated. So my mask was initially like in childhood, this like way to try to feel accepted. And then
Okay.
eventually it became a mask of just trying to fly under the radar. So like as I went into like the working world, I also learned that things like how you dress or present yourself allows you to like fly under the radar. Even though like I have some pretty progressive or non-mainstream thoughts or approaches in life, I dress very mainstream. I, wear makeup to try to like hide my physical disabilities. You're neurotypical. And I think I've done that even more consciously, like in my career. In the pandemic, like when I started burning out, I just kind of gave up. And I was like, oh, what? You know what? I'm going to dress like in ways that I enjoy or am comfortable most of the time. I spend a lot of time like scripting interactions, like we talked about, like planning
Yeah.
conversations, analyzing people that I know or interact with so that I can like anticipate their needs and behaviors.
Right.
So like over
That
rumination on
sounds familiar.
psychology. Yeah. So I catch myself like hiding my processing problems and delays. So like all the time, like in conversation, so people just assume I'm hard of hearing. And in actuality, it's just that my brain isn't processing at the pace of our conversation.
Yeah.
Or worse, I'll just like smile and nod because I have like no idea what's happening and it's just easier to
Easier to
not
just be
know.
like, yeah.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
masking for me is very much now like hiding my dysregulation and not meeting my physical needs. Masking really, I guess, is like the ultimate people pleasing behavior. It's about making other people feel comfortable instead of taking care of yourself. And unfortunately, I've come to realize that caused considerable trauma for me. So a neurodivergent mask is a way for us to cope in a world built for the neurotypical experience. And really, it's a trauma response. I'm just jaded, but that's what I think.
I have another question, but we're going to stay on task here. So, as you've been deconstructing like
That's a good example.
the
Or a good
mask,
word for all this. Yeah.
who, if anyone, sees you the most? Like, have you even figured out what a fully unmasked Luna? Because I haven't either.
I haven't, but I know parts of it. And I am more self-aware of like, oh, I'm not masked right now. Or like I'm
Yeah.
doing something that's I would consider masking.
Yeah.
Like for years, for most of my life, no one except like close family saw me just being me. And even honestly, most of my family wasn't safe for that. So I
Yeah.
learned to mask very young, right? Like so like the mask doesn't I don't think it breaks. But it does. I think part of growing up in a family with unidentified and unsupported neurodivergence is that like the mask is the status quo, right?
Right.
Like there's pressure to have a mask. So as a kid, I was heavily masking very young, and in fact, it was like probably the defining sense of awareness of myself. So like while sensory overwhelm was difficult, emotional regulation was probably the most difficult
That was
for me.
same. Yeah. I often also now I wonder if my mom was teaching me stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Was my mom teaching me masking? Like, was I learning? Like, what was I learning?
Yes, I identified that very much so in my family. It's
Yeah.
part of the generational trauma. And I
Yeah.
hid my emotions to the point where I wouldn't even allow myself to feel, let alone understand them, because I was in an environment where no one could handle my emotions. Like I literally was just in the room.
I didn't know that's why they were called feelings. I didn't know you were supposed to feel them. Like I went to
Literally feel that.
therapy
I
in
still don't
2018.
comprehend that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like I have a feeling arising in me of this and I'm like, "What?" Like you feel anger? No, I just scream at people.
I mean,
Oh,
so
I
like
didn't
I
realize the
can't,
whole time like I am having a physical response. I had just blocked it out.
we have disconnected from our body. And
Yeah.
part of that is the disability of connective tissue issues. So
Yep.
because there was like such this profound sense of unsafety, the mask only broke for me when I was so overwhelmed that I would have a meltdown, right? And
Yeah.
so I had learned to like either hide away or disassociate to cope. So very few people saw me unmasked. But now, like once I had the framework and self-understanding and self-reflection and gave myself a little grace and forgiveness, now as an adult, I intentionally work on trying to unmask with my partner. So like my partner, my kids, a handful of close friends see me unmask. And I only recently told a few coworkers that I'm disabled and ADHD because my life got so unmanageable that I had to begin seeking accommodations to
Yeah.
continue to work. I try not to mask with my family and close friends like you, Shelley, but I
Yeah.
still really haven't fully learned how to do that. The mindfulness stuff has helped with that because I am more mindful of like, what am I experiencing right now?
Right. I want to ask you if you do this. Have you caught yourself the other day? I was like dancing around a little bit and I noticed that I did it. And then I started immediately, okay, wait, do I like doing this? Or do I think I need to do this because I think I need to find what I like to do when I stim? And then I'm like in that cycle. And then I'm like, oh my God.
Just the self-doubt questioning thing, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I've done that. And specifically, it's funny that you mentioned like the physicality of things
Yeah.
because like when I got to the point where my health was good enough for me to go back to like the gym
Yeah.
and like weightlifting and swimming and stuff, like I loved it so much that I didn't really know how much I loved it until it got taken away from me. And like dance too. I loved dancing as a kid. Like
I've been really
we
missing
said, we would
dance.
stim to music. I would do whole
Yeah.
choreographed routines and stuff. But as I got, with hip dysplasia, that became very, very difficult. I'm pretty uncoordinated. So it's not, my ability to dance is not that great anymore. But it is not having that. And then having a moment where you get to participate in the joy of that feeling. It's like, you don't understand the sunshine until there's rain, right? Like, so
Yeah.
a few weekends ago, we got to go to a wedding and they're Pacific Islanders. So dance is very much a part of the
Mhm.
celebration, right?
Yeah.
And
I bet you
I,
had some really good food.
yeah, really good food. Yeah. And so I had worn like ankle boots. So like I was supported on my ankles and
That's smart.
I was wearing compression leggings. So I felt more stable and I had my hip wrap on and, but you can tell because like the long dress. So
Yeah.
whatever. And I was able to dance and Marlon and I got to dance and like experiencing the joy in that moment without like, so it wasn't like people that are my close family. Like, so I
Right.
didn't care about what people thought about me. Like, I didn't have to like think about it. You know what I mean? And so it was really just like me and him having fun and like having that ability to physically express like that kind of stuff really made me realize, okay, no, that really was something I liked.
That's a good way to,
Like, I wasn't as a kid just performing. Like, it was
right.
really just a joy. So like sometimes you don't know until you don't have something. Like, so I don't know, like don't dance for a while and then go dance and see if you like it. I don't know.
Yeah. Have you found, I mean, you knew of some neurodivergence when you were younger. Do you think your neurodivergence informed the direction you took your career or
It was not
or
a
your relate?
conscious thing for me. It was more like a disabling thing.
Um,
So like being neurodivergent and not fully diagnosed or supported has been, of course, very lonely.
Yeah.
Depression was like an overwhelming barrier for me when I was young. Many things seemed difficult in my lifetime that didn't seem difficult to other people. It limited like my courage to pursue my talents and passions. I
Yeah.
struggled every time there was like a milestone that other people my age were experiencing. I struggled to adapt to big life changes. So I had like a serious burnout every time there was a big transition, like middle school, high school,
Yeah.
college, then like getting into a serious relationship. So I for a long time considered myself an underachiever, which is a very internalized ableism way of approaching that, right?
Yeah.
Because like I was told you could do so much more with your life and your abilities and your intelligence and your talents.
Yeah.
And I just like felt like a disappointment, right? So it really fractured like my identity, of course. I feel like my emotional development is stunted compared to other people too. So like not just like career, like the material things of the world, but also like the more internal things. But and then of course it affects like your day-to-day things, just managing adult things like a
Right.
household, chores, budgeting. I can't stand going to the grocery store, for example. I don't go. Previously, like someone would have to go for me. Now we can do pickup, and I love that. Struggling with so many like life skills and not understanding why, but having to rely on like a partner to bolster your
I
like
understand now
self.
body doubling. Like I
Oh
I
yeah,
understand
that's
why.
amazing.
I'm like, why could I do this if you're just
Mhm.
there but not even like interacting with oh,
Right.
that's why. Like
Yeah. But so
and
like not having an understanding of those things, like not knowing like what that is, not realizing like that I need help with certain things caused issues in my two
right.
long-term relationships because like it's almost like you're infantilized in some ways because
Mhm.
you're disabled but not in a defined way. And so like you have this ableism that like assigns some sort of character flaw to it. So I've gone through the unmasking with like my current partner. It's really been a struggle, not only for me, but it affects, the family. I love my family really deeply. Like I really care about my kids. My most important goal in life is to leave a different legacy for them and teach them
Right.
different. Right. So like I hate thinking that my disabilities make me incapable in some way of meeting their needs. Right.
Yeah.
They don't always understand. And then like they may internalize their hurt feelings. So it creates like relationship issues, like, like you said. But so
Yeah.
it's made those deeper things like parenting, self development much more of a challenge too. Like people, I think, that don't experience what we do maybe take some of those things for granted. Experiencing dysregulation, like while trying to support your child through meltdowns, is really triggering. I don't think people are aware enough, one, like what we talk about, that autistic neurodivergent humans have a lot of health issues, but also that there are some social concerns that are just kind of swept under the rug about us. Autistic people are abused and sexually assaulted at, higher rates. 9 out of 10 autistic humans have been sexually assaulted. And I've
Yeah.
been taken advantage of several times, and I'm not really going to get into it. I just, like, I wanted to say that it's been a part of my life.
I've realized a lot of things too in that regard. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So we both have I mean, I I guess I'm still in burnout. Am I coming out of it? Have you experienced burnout? Are you still in it? Did you burn out at another time that you didn't know was burnout?
Yeah. Every burnout I've had into this last one, I had no idea what it was.
Okay.
So I think I've just experienced waves of either dissociation or burnout my entire life and not
Yeah.
really understood it, if that makes sense.
No, I get that. I definitely experienced bouts of it, and usually they would just go and put me on an antidepressant, and sometimes it helped and sometimes it didn't, but that was just
I
looking
think
back, that just
normally it just numbed some things. It didn't really
it,
make anything better.
yeah. Yeah. Looking back now, yeah, it just kind of it allowed me to handle the situation better, but it didn't actually like
Yeah.
fix anything
Right.
necessarily. what does burnout look like for you?
It's like this emotional and physical shutdown. Like it's really about like just survival, like basic tasks. It's very one dimensional. There's not a lot of like emotional depth or emotion other than maybe like depression or numbness.
Yeah.
Even like when it, like I think when it starts, I feel frustrated, but even once I'm into it, I don't even feel like frustration. But like someone on the outside looking in may see like I'm just really disconnected, or I
Yeah.
seem unmotivated or lazy, fatigued, sick, distracted,
Yeah.
disengaged.
How do you
That's probably what
reignite,
it's perceived as.
or have you figured out any strategies that you can share?
I don't know that I have ever really successfully reignited myself after burnout. It's like or intentionally. I think some things have happened to kind of trigger that for me. One was becoming a mom.
Okay.
After I had my kiddo, like it's kind of just allowed me to reorient my priorities and do some self-reflection and give myself a little bit more grace. So like I had no framework yet for any of this, but it allowed me to shift my paradigm. But now I'm trying more intentionally. I don't have it figured out. I'm still very much struggling with this.
Yeah.
But therapy and regulating my nervous system, and managing my health, seeking connection with safe people are helping life be more manageable. So I think, really for me, this chapter is about discovering how to do that. I don't really have the answers. I'm very much trying to heal those things right
Yeah.
now or cope. I understand like it may not heal, right? Like
For me, biggest struggle for me right now is just trying to stop and like evaluating the success of my day based on whether or not I was productive.
and productivity stuff
Yeah.
is really toxic.
So let me see. Is there anything else you want to add about
I
when
think
you
I
were
skipped over some.
when you were diagnosed, were you like, yeah, like you were already kind of maybe not the ADHD,
Oh,
but like autism. Like, were you
which
relieved or were you like
no.
no?
So,
Or
so it's weird because a lot of people that have gone through this experience of being late diagnosed, like very intentionally have come to that diagnosis. And there's
right,
arguments about like being invalidated or the struggle to get diagnosed or like acceptance of self diagnosis and all that. While I had researched it quite a bit, I really struggled to accept it because it
okay,
had been hammered into me that that's not what was quote wrong with me.
okay,
So it's not that I fully resisted it. I just questioned, like, are we sure this is what's going on here?
right,
Because I've been very clearly told by multiple medical professionals that that wasn't what I was thinking was happening in my own kid. That,
right,
these sorts of things. I definitely think I struggled with my experiences in gaslighting
yeah,
to accept that. In fact, I argued with the neuropsychiatrist when she gave me the diagnosis.
how
And
autistic of you.
no. And so she went through there's a questionnaire that measures like your masking. And we had done this already. Like, but
Right,
she went through it with me, like went through her thought process of the evaluation of that questionnaire with me
yeah,
to prove to me how deeply I was masking and how much it was affecting me. So it was like I went through all the evaluation. I politely questioned her and said, like, I disagree. Are we sure it's not just the trauma combined with ADHD?
right,
So she broke it down for me and was like, when there's signs of this, early in life, and you can identify traits across the family, and someone has this sort of approach with me. It's very obvious to me as someone who assesses these things
Right.
that this is what you're experiencing. So she politely said, like, it's obvious to me, but I understand why you're resisting. So let's break down like your resistance.
Yeah.
In other words, your mask. And so she was kind enough to do that with me. I think it took a lot of patience.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it wasn't. I don't know that my path, while similar in it being late diagnosed as a woman
Yeah.
and as an ADHD already person, I don't think that my path is that common for someone that's like, so insistent to be like, no, that's not me.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause for me, I was like, if I finish this call and they tell me I'm not, then I give up. Like that's where I was with it. Like if I'm not, then I don't know. Then maybe I will just go
Yeah. And I'm
take that
thankful.
hard left
Yeah.
turn in
Yeah.
my car. Cause that's kind of where I was at that point. Like,
And I think also part of that was, you said you sought diagnosis because you wanted the medication for the ADHD aspects.
right.
For me, I think it was really hard to hear, like, hey, you have another something that
Right.
there's no quote cure for, there's no treatment for that's
Yeah.
helpful or effective as
I
you
think,
would
well,
wish.
also, I had 15 years of experience with a child that I watched who had struggles and then improved and is now like
Yeah.
adulting-ish. He's adulting light. And it's, I'm like, okay. And
Yeah.
then I was like, you know what? If I am or if I'm not, I've gotten this far in life.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you just explained is really important to the conversation, that right back to where we started. This
Yeah.
is neurodiversity.
Yeah.
There's a spectrum of the spectrum.
Yep.
And while there's overlap, there's multiple causes, multiple ways of experiencing the world, multiple ways we're, socially conditioned, different gender experiences, all those things. While uniting ourselves, it's also really important to acknowledge that there's different levels of experience in this.
Yeah. Thank you, especially to our listeners.
If you would take just a minute to share, follow, or leave us a review, it helps us grow the podcast and spread awareness.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wish you healthy hypermobility. Have a happy day, zebras.
Bye, zebras.